The train came to a stop along the Columbia River on a frosty November morning, 1926. A group of local ranchers, farmers, and curious travelers had gathered. They wanted to see what Sam Hill was up to this time. For more than 25 years, Sam Hill was an indomitable presence in the Northwest. Some believed he was a visionary, a man who championed good roads throughout the Northwest. Others said he was a fool who wasted his fortune in the pursuit of fame. On this day, he promised them a queen, and she was coming to dedicate his museum. A museum, he said, would be like no other in the world. Soon, Hill emerged with his royal guest, Queen Marie of Romania. A motorcade escorted them up the cliffs to his Maryhill estate, and people crowded around to greet them. But when they arrived, Queen Marie could hardly believe her eyes. Sam Hill had invited her halfway around the world to dedicate an empty concrete building in the middle of nowhere.
Who is Sam Hill? I don't know.
Sam Hill.
Sam Hill.
Wait, Sam Hill. I read he was on one of the signs back there. I know that much.
I kind of know that one.
Lewis and Clark I've heard of, but Sam Hill? No idea.
He started the Maryhill Museum for his wife, and his wife decided, I'm not living out here in the middle of nowhere, and she went back to the Midwest and left him, and so they had this building, and so he turned it into a museum.
There's that phrase. What the Sam Hill?
The expression was born long before the man in our story, but he was so unpredictable that Oregonians may well have asked themselves, what the Sam Hill is Sam Hill up to now?
You really either liked him or you really, really didn't like him. And I think it depended on what side of the progress fence you were sitting.
Sam Hill fit into a generation of men and even some women who were builders in Oregon and Washington. He would build things that could become truly legacy projects, such as roads, bridges.
Sam's greatest legacy to the people of the Pacific Northwest, I think, are its roads. The idea of having an interconnected road system to make life easier.
The Oregon story is full of these people. Sam Hill is different from others in several respects. One, he simply does more than all of them.
Sam Hill was nearly 40 years old when he first saw the wonders of Oregon and Washington. Before that, he was a railroad man, working for James J. Hill's Great Northern Railway in Minneapolis.
Oh, he was handsome. He's very handsome. He was dashing, very personable. People really liked him.
He was smart, too. A graduate of Harvard, Sam had a great drive to learn the business of building railroads and soon became one of J.J. Hill's most trusted employees.
And it was that drive that caused him to be recognized there, and it was eventually that drive that caused him, who I have been told was one of the preeminent bachelors of the area, to set his sights on James's daughter, Mary.
Mary and Sam Hill were married in the fall of 1888.
By all accounts, at least for the first few years, it was a happy arrangement. And then around the turn of the century, he became interested in the Northwest.
Sam traveled west to manage J.J. Hill's business interests there.
He saw the mountains, he saw the ocean, and he saw the Columbia River Gorge, and he saw all the natural scenic wonders of the Pacific Northwest, and he fell in love with it. I think he just literally fell in love with what he saw.
The Pacific Northwest changed Sam Hill, and he made a big decision to leave the Great Northern Railroad, move to Seattle, and make it on his own. He invested in new technologies like telephone and home utility services. Within a few years, he was a rich man. By this time, he and Mary had a family.
And at that point, things began to get difficult for his personal life. James, the son, really didn't have the drive and determination of his father, which disappointed Sam. And his daughter grew into a beautiful woman who was diagnosed with schizophrenia fairly early in life. And so it must have been a terrible disappointment for a man who thrived on people and events and celebrations.
Still, he was building a home for them in Seattle, but his wife had little interest in the West, and the marriage was failing.
He desperately wanted her to come out and stay with the children, and she did try it. To be fair to Mary, she did try, but she left before the house was finished in Seattle and went home.
Sam would visit Mary and the kids, but he couldn't go back to Minneapolis. He saw a grand future for himself here, in the mountains and fertile valleys of the Pacific Northwest. At the turn of the 20th century, the West was young and feisty. Farmers, ranchers, and loggers were carving out a living from the wilderness. And cities were tough and scrappy. It was a do-it-yourself corner of the world. At the same time, the entire economy relied on riverboats and railroads for trade and travel. Sam had a different notion. He came to believe that roads, good roads, were essential for a society to thrive, and the idea began to consume him.
He lived into an era when roads were going to become the way of transportation. He saw the future of the automobile probably a decade or two before most people did.
Roads in the Pacific Northwest were really a mess. The big concern was just simply getting out of the mud. What roads were around were really nothing more than livestock trails, cattle paths, 2 tracks.
Sam became a self-taught expert on the subject, reading volumes and studying road systems around the world. He began telling colleagues, "Roads are more than my hobby. They are my religion."
People always wondered, here's a railroad man interested in building good roads. But I think he saw a symbiotic relationship between good roads and railroads, because good roads ensured that products got to market.
I think he also was involved because he wanted to get the city people to the countryside. So as much as he wanted the farmers to thrive, he wanted the everyday blokes who lived in the city to come and experience what he saw, which was gorgeous, gorgeous scenery, and a place where you could almost become spiritually whole again.
And the most beautiful place in the world to Sam was the Columbia River Gorge. In the 1880s, a river road had been attempted through the gorge and failed. Local officials came to believe the topography was just too difficult, too unstable for a highway. Sam didn't believe the critics for a minute. If a train track could go through the gorge, then so could a road.
So he finds the best road builders and engineers that he can, Sam Lancaster and others, brings them into his orbit, and then puts them to work.
Samuel Lancaster was already a famous road engineer when Hill met him in 1906. Hill convinced him that together they could build a highway through the gorge that would be the envy of the world. Then Hill took Lancaster on a whirlwind tour of Europe to show him the kind of road he was talking about.
I think it was around 1909. And they were going up the Rhine River. And Lancaster later related that Sam turned to him and he said for them to look at what was around them, the river and the hills, the vineyards and the castles on the cliffs. And then he said, this is what the Columbia could be. This is what the Columbia could be.
But convincing the people of Oregon and Washington would be another challenge altogether. Hill first approached Washington, but they found the idea of a remote road through rough terrain a waste of taxpayer dollars. He was warned, you can't survey a road along the Columbia River, let alone build one.
The Washington Highway Commission turns him down and he says, the heck with you, I'm going to Portland. And he stays here at Arlington Club, in fact, in the very room where we are talking. And he makes this his home. So in some respects, this becomes his office. And it's also the place, perhaps most important, where he can meet his peers.
Sam befriends Oregon's movers and shakers, Simon Benson, Oswald West, and John Yon, among others.
Sam Hill could command a room. He could get people around him motivated to do things.
He also had a personal interest in getting a road built through the gorge. Sam Hill was dreaming of a Columbia River utopia.
Sometime around 1905 or 1906, he started looking at property along the Columbia River. It had occurred to him that there could be some sort of magic place where the western rains of Washington and Oregon could meet up with those eastern suns.
The story goes, he initially set his sights on White Salmon, Washington, a small town overlooking the Columbia River. It seemed like the perfect spot. The Jewett family, prominent landowners in the area, invited Sam for dinner one night. He became so enamored with their beautiful home and property that Sam made a generous offer to buy their place on the spot.
Sam loved his whiskey, and he pulled out his whiskey flask to sort of celebrate the paper signing, and unfortunately the Jewetts were not whiskey drinkers. In fact, they were teetotalers, and they just tore the papers up right then and there. So Sam was forced to look for other property and ultimately purchased some 6,000 acres, a little over that, a little bit more on the drier side than I think he'd hoped for, right there within view of Celilo Falls, within view of some of the greatest scenery in the world.
Hill proclaimed, "We have found the Garden of Eden. It is the garden spot of the world." And here, Sam began to build his farming community from scratch. He called it Maryhill for his daughter. Buildings were erected, acres of fruit trees and grapevines planted. Then, with Sam Lancaster as engineer, Hill embarked on a great experiment. He started building a road.
He knew he needed to have roads, and he wanted to do it right, whereby the road becomes part of the landscape. The landscape is all important. You build the road to support its beauty, and you build a road, of course, for useful purposes. He learned that in Europe.
It was the first paved road in the state of Washington, and financed entirely by Hill for $100,000. Sam proclaimed, "I've spent more each year in the construction of good roads than has the national government."
Next, he wanted to have his own home on the property, and so he began to build what he called his ranch house or his farmhouse.
It would be the centerpiece of his Maryhill community, over-engineered with thick concrete walls to withstand the test of time. He wrote, "I expect this house to be here for 1,000 years after I am gone." The house was wired for electricity, although there was no electric service. And he built 2 enormous underground garages for automobiles he believed would come. As always, Sam was building for the future. Maryhill seemed to have everything. Everything but water. Sam had set his farming community too far east in a semi-arid desert, where the meager annual rainfall just couldn't support the intensive agricultural community he envisioned.
He wanted to put down roots somewhere. He wanted to have a place he called his own. He really wanted some kind of utopian community. That he didn't achieve it was, again, another kind of surprise in his life.
Sam realized his community was failing and halted construction. Within months, his dream home stood unfinished and abandoned in the wilderness.
Throughout his life, he's constantly testing himself, sometimes failing, but sometimes succeeding. And it's this constant testing of himself in business, in design projects, in these gigantic construction projects, things that most people wouldn't even begin to plan, much less embark on.
The failure did not defeat Sam Hill. He was already working on another plan, and he banked on his grand experiment at Maryhill to help pave the way.
And that's when he went to his friend, Governor West, in Oregon. And Governor West said, "You don't have to convince me, you have to convince the Oregon legislature."
So Hill invited the entire Oregon legislature to see the most modern road in the West for themselves. Early in 1913, they boarded a train bound for Maryhill.
They had plenty of food, plenty of wine, plenty of probably liquor, and they traveled east. And by the time they got up on Hill's property at Maryhill, there they were, all of them, excited and in great anticipation about the roads they were going to see.
Hill showed them his Maryhill Road, its looping grade, the hard paved surface.
And Hill proved to them over and over again that road building in the Columbia Gorge was possible. They went back and they voted the money to create the Columbia Gorge Highway.
Construction on the Columbia River Highway started later that year. Engineering duties went to Sam Lancaster, but the highway would be as Hill envisioned. He took great pleasure inspecting the work site, visiting with the men, and watching his dream on the Columbia come to be. The highway was dedicated July 7, 1916, and immediately hailed as an engineering masterpiece.
The Columbia River Highway was an urban boulevard placed in the middle of a rural setting. It was unlike the country roads that most people experienced, where they were rutted and full of potholes. So they had this elegant driving experience on what was really the most modern of roads.
And the journey was full of surprises. Waterfalls seemed to appear at every turn. Rocks hung perilously overhead. Bridges arched over lush canyons. And the road offered turnouts, places to simply stop and take in the view. For the first time, people could drive from Oregon's high desert to the Pacific Ocean in one day and see the wonders of the Columbia River Gorge up close. Sam's triumph at the Columbia River Highway only fueled his desire to do more. He lobbied for more good roads throughout the Northwest.
He was involved in roads heading to the coast. He was involved in roads heading down through the Siskiyous. He was involved in roads heading down into southern Oregon. He wanted people to see the wonders and the beauties.
He's very project-oriented, and I think in order to do that, he has to have not only a great drive, but a great sense of self-confidence that he can achieve these. And then, of course, as he succeeds, it simply feeds this passion to do.
Roads weren't Sam's only passion. He was also planning to build one of the most unusual monuments to peace in America. He would model it on Stonehenge. Stonehenge wouldn't be his only peace monument. He also financed the Peace Arch in Blaine, Washington, a huge symbol straddling the border between the U.S. and Canada.
He wanted to leave legacies because he was brought up to give back to his community. But I also think there was a part of Sam Hill, part of that drive that he had as a young man that wanted to see his name in lights, to see himself as sort of the giver.
In fact, Sam loved to be in the spotlight. The interstate bridge connecting Vancouver, Washington, and Portland is completed, and Sam Hill presides over the ribbon-cutting ceremony. A few years later, he's at the podium celebrating the completion of the Pacific Highway. And all the while, Sam Hill was tirelessly promoting good roads at home and abroad.
Sam Hill was really someone on the cutting edge, and he used some cutting-edge technologies to sell his Good Roads program.
Sam just loved projectors, and he had actually several stereoscopic machines which projected images onto walls or screens at the time. He had hundreds of slides made in which they would be black and white, then hand-colored so that the color could shine up on the screen. He would use these consistently throughout the Pacific Northwest and internationally, Japan for one, to promote roads and road building.
Here's a guy who is fluent in German, French, Italian, and who knows what other languages. He's a great communicator, whether it's in Paris or Munich or Rome, or whether it's in a classroom in southeast Portland. What did they say, that he gave talks to more than 20,000 school kids in Portland about roads? I mean, who else is going out, even nowadays, with a PowerPoint and doing that kind of work? Very few people, if anyone. But here he goes out and does this on top of all of his other obligations. Clearly, here is a man who is driven to teach. Who would you compare him with nowadays? I frankly don't know.
Sam Hill was an international celebrity, the guest of kings and presidents, queens and emperors. But back home, folks would still point to his failure at Maryhill.
It was Hill's Folly on the Columbia. It was a kind of a Northwest joke to some people.
By 1920, Sam realized he was getting a little older and grasped at the chance to somehow revive his Maryhill estate. If it would never be a farming utopia, then maybe it could become an oasis of a different kind. Sam drafted a bold plan. he would convert his abandoned home into a museum and launched a campaign to collect works of art from his famous friends around the world. It would be his last great gift to the Northwest. Today, visitors sometimes shake their heads in disbelief by what they find there. Original works by Rodin, rare Native American artifacts, and a collection of paintings, sculpture, and furniture that is so marvelous but seems so out of place here. Maybe the answer was best summed up by a stranger to America, a queen, who came to dedicate Sam's fledgling museum in 1926. As I stand here today in this curious building, I would like to explain why I came. There is much more than concrete in this structure. There is a dream built into this place. So when Samuel Hill asked me to come overseas to this house built in the wilderness, I came with love and understanding. Sometimes the things dreamers do seem incomprehensible to others, and the world wonders why dreamers do not see the way others do. Although Maryhill Museum would not officially open its doors during Sam's lifetime, his great dream for the Northwest is alive today. He pulled Oregon out of the mud with a road system connecting farm to market and city to countryside. He built monumental projects celebrating the wonders of the Northwest. And he dared to dream of a utopia on the banks of the Columbia River.
Funding for Oregon Experience is provided by the James F. and Marion L. Miller Foundation, the Ann and Bill Swindell's Charitable Trust, the Oregon Cultural Trust, and from viewers like you. Thank you.